Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, and then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Wendy Korbusieski, and we're looking at verses 7 through 12 of Psalm 26. In the first 6 verses of Psalm 26, the psalmist gives this description of who his life is like as an innocent person who acts with integrity. So this claim of innocence is placed in terms of the kind of people the psalmist hangs out with. I don't spend time with liars. I do not go along with hypocrites. I hate the gatherings of those who do evil. I refuse to join with the wicked. The author clarifies the character of the sort of people he avoids. Their hands are dirty with evil schemes in verse 10. They take bribes. And the wicked crowd is contrasted by the language that describes actions related to worship at the sanctuary. So that's kind of the context of what he's talking about. There's an implied reference to the sort of actions that people who worship at the sanctuary consistently perform. So verse 6, he talks about things like they wash their hands, they go to the altar or go around the altar. Verse 7, they sing songs of thanksgiving. They testify the wonders of the Lord. Verse 8, they love God's sanctuary. So David is confident because he's in the right crowd. Verse 12 seems to represent this level of confidence that one might assume is missing based on his pleas throughout verses 1 through 11, when he writes, I stand on solid ground and I will publicly praise the Lord. We hear this tone of faith that his supplication is going to be answered. The picture of praising the Lord publicly also implies that David does so when he is in a crowd that goes to the sanctuary. The sinners he describes in the psalm meet in gatherings where they scheme to do evil. They take bribes, which would imply things done secretly and out of public view. But David stands in the public in verse 12 and on solid ground. The reader gets the impression that he is in the sanctuary crowd. So David's claims of innocence, which we talked about yesterday, are directly related to or linked to the crowd of people that he hangs out with. We've had conversations about this as a staff. This is a real challenge, so how do you, or where is the balance for the believer in hanging out with believers versus reaching out to sinners? How do you choose the right crowd and still reach the world?
I think first you've got to know which is which. And you have to identify what is the hangout and what is the reach out. For me, the hangout has to be a place of comfort. It has to be a place of identity. And it has to be a place of influence, both where you can exude influence and you are influenced. All of those things happen where you hang out. Places where you reach out, you have to gain a level of trust so that you can influence. But it can't be so much so that you become influenced. And there's that fine line. So creating that boundary and being very aware of where that line is so that it doesn't become muddied and the influencer becomes influenced. So, you got to be careful.
How do you personally determine who you're hanging out with and who you're reaching out to? Because I like that concept.
There needs to be some litmus tests, what do they do for fun? What are they?
Yeah, no. I get the separation
right.
piece. So how do you determine whether you're hanging out or reaching out? That's the question I'm asking. How do you determine that?
Oh, like in this moment, what am I doing? Am I hanging out or am I reaching out?
Is this a hangout or is this a reach out? How do you distinguish between the two?
I think they can look a lot alike.
Okay.
I think because hanging out and reaching out is some moments of free times. I think the reach out is going to be more intentional. I think it's going to be more on purpose. Hanging out kind of happens more organically. It's just your nature. It happens because that's life. That's how you're living. A reach out, I think, has to happen more on purpose, and it needs to, because you have to be on guard in those moments.
That concept, so the hangout part in general is easy. My hanging out crowd pretty much gets chosen for me because of my vocation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not serving the Lord, the people that I have to spend, I mean, it's not that I mind, but the people that I have to spend a lot of my time with, elders, deacons,
Mm-hmm.
Staff, church leaders in general, you expect them to live right. So in my case, the hangout piece is solved for me,
Mm-hmm.
much different than the people from the outside. That may not be in vocational ministry, let me put it that way. The reach out part, though, is much more difficult for me for multiple reasons. One, I'm trying to remember. It's somewhere I've been in the last 2 weeks. Where was I at? Oh, I know exactly where I was. Yeah, now it was a community function, and somebody walked up beside of me because it was, well, I tell you where it was. It was Boogie on Broad. So we walked down there, and somebody jokingly said, they walked up to me and they said, "Well, here comes the preacher. Everybody's hiding their beer," and they meant it as a joke, but that's the honest to God's truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because so that reach out part for me is, if people know who I am, they often will change their behavior immediately
Mm-hmm.
to disguise what would be natural to them, whether they're believers, and I would say most of the people that he was talking about were people who were believers that might have been ashamed. It was
Putting on their mask.
right. So the reaching out piece for me is a challenge. One, because I'm consumed with church people.
Right.
Two, people change their behaviors. But I know people, like I hear John Maxwell and Chris Hodges constantly telling stories about these random people that they begin relationships with.
Yeah.
But what I know about both of them is, though, they're asking some intentional questions to lead down a path.
Mm-hmm.
That if they're placed in a situation, in John's case, he would tell you years ago he would have had airplane conversations. Now he flies on private planes, so that's not an option. But other places he would. But Chris flies commercially when he flies, I guess, most of the time. And, he'll tell stories about just striking up even sometimes they'll strike up a conversation with him when he didn't really want to talk to him because he's somewhat of an introvert. But they have these questions that lead them down this path that I'm always envious of.
There are some people who just have a gift for that, and every opportunity they are becomes a mission field.
Mm-hmm.
The grocery store, on a plane, at the mall, at their cousin's wedding with random strangers, becomes reaching out
Right.
with people that they don't know. And because of the pastor factor, if they know you and they see you coming, shields up, danger, danger.
If they're looking,
Mm-hmm.
if they're seeking, particularly if they're having a life crisis, recently I was in a public store and I passed by somebody, and as soon as they saw me, they started tearing up. I could see them coming. And, they were like, "Are you going to be in the office tomorrow?" I said, "Sure." And I was going to be there. And they said, "I need to come by and see you." I said, "Okay." After such and such a time. Well, I never heard from them. So what I took that to mean was they were having a life crisis right at that moment. they must have gotten appeased or decided not to come. But there are times like that people will see me and they'll reach out wanting some spiritual prayer, guidance, advice. But most of the time, people put on their best behavior when I come around. I don't know. That's a challenging thing. I have more success with strangers than I do with people who know who I am. Because once they know who I am, they feel like there are certain expectations I have.
But that's what we should all do, pastor or not pastor. That's our outreach. Everywhere we go, every stranger we meet, there's an opportunity to share a message. At least share some love.
Right.
Share some compassion.
Don't be afraid to have the conversation.
Right.
So is it he does criticize some of the people, he condemns people in what we might call the center crowd. Is that arrogant or self-righteous or judgmental for him to boast about his own righteousness with this group and the unrighteousness in the other group?
I mean, it feels that way, but you got to call sin what it is. If we just dance around it, we're hiding from it. You need to call it out. We need to call what's good and what's bad. And to put ourselves on a pedestal, I think, is arrogant. But to call out sin, to call the person bad, that one's a tough one for me. To judge the actions, to call out sin, I think we're commanded to do that.
We tend to group people together. Politics in the church has only made that worse, where we group people together, and we condemn this group and celebrate this group. I have zero problem addressing sin. That's not an issue. I really struggle where you group people together, and I think he does it. He says those who do, and he's not alone in doing that in Scripture. There are other places, that happens, even in the New Testament. But it just it can be. It does feel self-righteous a little bit, slightly arrogant. I'm better than you. I'm smarter than you. I can think of times in recent history where people were saying something and it came across as I'm so much better or smarter than you, and you don't know anything, and you automatically tune them out. It's hard.
It damages your message.
It's hard to get people to listen.
You can't get past that.
Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue a conversation around the Book of Psalms.